Good morning. Welcome to Radio Friends on Friday, May the 7th. This Sunday is Mother's Day. That means that we have Larry Brown with us, sitting over there.
In my motherly appearance.
Yeah, right, exactly. And as tradition, you will share a Mother's Day story with us. At least that's the story I hope you have.
Yes, I will. Yes,
okay.
I will.
Does it have a name?
Yes, it does. Whose baby is this?
What is it?
Whose baby is this?
Okay, so here is Larry Brown with a Mother's Day story titled, Whose Baby is This?
The king was distressed. He was discouraged. He was upset. The elite ruling caste depended on him managing the economy. And the economy had been strong. Crops had been productive, and in fact, he was having to build more storage units to hold the food to distribute. And the infrastructure program was expanding. There was more waterways, there was more monumental architecture, public plazas. Everything was really good for the upper crust. But the king was also discouraged because all of this economy had been built on enslaved peoples. Some of them had been immigrants, others had been raised now in several generations of slavery. And the king, you see, was worried because as he began to assess the situation, demographically speaking, there was only a few at the top, and there were lots of enslaved people. And there were worries, of course, about slave uprising and resistance. The king was also worried that perhaps there would be enemies abroad that would take advantage of this enslaved population and incite riots within the country. So he had a lot to be worried about. Now, it was, of course, his belief that women were more manageable, and it was the young men that he would have to pay attention to. And so, as was perhaps the custom of other rulers of the time, he had an edict. He said, all male children should be killed. Now, there were two women who perhaps were a part of a bit of a resistance movement who had very important roles among the enslaved people, two midwives. One was named Shiphrah, and the other was named Puah, who were called to have a conference with the king. And the king was worried that the order that he had made for all male children was not being enforced. Now, these two women were wise, crafty, and said to the king, we're called in as midwives, but these women are so strong that by the time we get there, the child is already born, and we can't do anything about it. But the king then said, if a male child is born, throw them in the river. Now, I suspect that those two midwives, who perhaps were leaders of this mothers' resistant movement, did not change their behavior much. But it so happened at that time there was an enslaved woman who gave birth to a boy, and she was able to keep it hidden in secret from the authorities, from the watchful eye of those slave masters. And for 3 months she'd kept that secret, but the time came when she was just afraid now that this toddler would be known, and so she didn't know what to do. Well, they lived on that sacred river, the river that, of course, was where the king had suggested all boy children should be thrown. That river was sacred. That river would give life, and it would take life. In the spring floods, it would provide silt, wonderful soil for crop productivity, but the flooding also caused damage, and they were in a semi-arid region, and that water was their life. And perhaps she hoped, out of some kind of faith, that maybe she could put the child in the river. And so she fashioned a basket and made sure that it was watertight and buoyant and placed her infant in the river. Well, respecting the king's wishes, throw those baby boys in the river, but she put him in a basket and assigned her oldest daughter to watch. So the oldest daughter put the basket in the water. And it was at that time that the king's daughter, the princess, happened to be bathing at the river. Whether it was ritual purification or perhaps personal hygiene, the princess spotted that basket. and had her entourage bring it to her, and there she discovered an infant whom she immediately recognized was a child of the enslaved people. And whether it was mercy or love or perhaps a motherly instinct, she wanted to keep that child. Well, the older sister of that child came forward courageously and said, I know that you're unable to nurse this child and take care of it, but I will find someone in the enslaved population, a mother who would nurse that child and take care of it until it's old enough to be returned to you. And so she took that child back to its mother. And its mother raised that child until it was time to give it back to the princess. And the princess took that child and adopted it as her own. Now, perhaps you're already suspicious that you know this story, for that child, indeed, when he reached maturity, understood who he was and eventually led a liberation movement that would free those enslaved people. Now, the name he was given was Moshe, which is very similar to the word in that ancient language, Moshe, which means drawn from the river or saved by the river. Also in another ancient language and faith tradition, he is known as Musa, which also means to be drawn and saved by the waters. We know that name, perhaps in its transliterated and translated term, Moses. And of course, the young woman who was courageous in saving Moses' life by allowing the mother to take care of him and the princess to raise her was Miriam. Maybe it's a story about systems you're going to change when you have some assertive mothers around.
Oh, that's a perfect, absolutely perfect Mother's Day story. A tribute to all moms out there. Larry, you tell these stories so beautifully.
Oh, well, thank you, Paul.
You have written many yourself. Are you back out talking now?
Yes, beginning now. In fact, the other day was able to do a birthday party at a park in the open and tell some story to children.
And you have been vaccinated, and
yes,
you've had both of your shots, so it's safe to be around. And what's nice is the fact that we can now be around. If we've been vaccinated, we can be around other people who've been vaccinated safely.
And again, use the precautions.
Right. But if they want to contact you, it's brownstory@hotmail.com.
You've got it.
Right? And you'll be happy to go out and start sharing stories with people again.
We can make the arrangements. I'll do it.
All right, Larry Brown. Thank you so much for coming by. And thank you for that beautiful story. And for those of you who still have your mom with you, give her a great big hug and hope you have a happy Mother's Day. And if they're not with you on this earth, remember they're with you in spirit. We'll see you Monday. Bye-bye.